Okay, I would like to take the time to welcome everyone to our webinar today. It's entitled Breaking Barriers, Clinical Trials and Cancer Research. In this session, we will discuss clinical trials, why it's important to have a diverse population of both patients and researchers and physicians, and what barriers do exist with clinical trials. I would first like to thank our core sponsor, who is Olympus, and our co-sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb and Merck. Our moderator for today will be Lindsay Glassbill. Here's just a little bit about Lindsay. Lindsay is a clinical navigator with the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, bringing over 20 years of experience as a registered nurse, including 15 years in oncology, specializing in medical advocacy, biomarker education, and clinical trial navigation. Lindsay is committed to providing colorectal cancer patients with the knowledge and support they need to navigate complex treatment options and make informed decisions. As a passionate advocate and educator, Lindsay works to improve patient outcomes through personalized care and education. She is dedicated to raising awareness about colorectal cancer, including the importance of early detection and prevention. She actively works to empower patients and healthcare professionals with the latest information on biomarkers and clinical trials. Lindsay holds a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from the University of North Dakota and is a proud member of AONN+, the Academy of Oncology Nurse and Patient Navigators, where she continues to collaborate with peers and contribute to the ongoing education and advancement of oncology care. Please welcome our moderator and panelist, Lindsay Glassbill.
Thank you, Pam. And so now I am going to do the introduction of our amazing panel we have today. So we are going to start with Dr. Emo Liu. Today we are excited to welcome Dr. Emo Liu. Dr. Liu is a diplomat of the American Board of Internal Medicine and is board certified in medical oncology, internal medicine, and neuro-oncology. He has been a faculty member in the Division of Hematology, Oncology, and Transplantation at the University of Minnesota since 2011 and is an active member of the Masonic Cancer Center. Dr. Liu's work focuses on advancing care for patients with complex cancers, bridging oncology with translational research. He also provides leadership in case-by initiatives. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Emo Liu. Up next on our panel is Dr. Aparna Parikh, an expert in gastrointestinal cancers, focusing on young adults with colorectal and pancreatic cancer. She leads clinical trials at Mass General Cancer Center, serves on the NCCN Colorectal Cancer Guidelines Committee, and is a global leader in liquid biopsy research, committed to advancing cancer care worldwide. She also provides leadership in case-by initiatives. We are excited to have Dr. Parikh with us today. Joining us next is Sharon Rivera Sanchez, founder and CEO of Saving Pennies for a Cure and Trials of Color. Sharon works to provide support for breast cancer patients and to increase diversity in clinical trials, aiming to raise African American participation from 4.5% to 20%. She is a national speaker on equity in cancer research and committed to making cancer care more inclusive. Thank you, Sharon, for joining us today. And rounding out our panel is Janice Johnson. Janice is a stage 4 colon cancer patient and an incredible advocate for people living with cancer. She brings her own lived experience navigating care and clinical trials to the conversation, making sure that the patient voices are heard and prioritized in research and care decision. Her dedication to equity and patient-centered care is truly inspiring. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Janice Johnson. All right, welcome panelists. So we are gonna start out right away because I'm sure everyone's excited to hear our questions and answers. So we are gonna start with Dr. Liu. Dr. Liu, you've built a career across multiple cancer specialties. From your perspective, what is the current state of trial access and participation?
Well, Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for the very kind introduction, and it's an honor to be here with an esteemed panel like this. Thanks for the shout outs on the board certifications. I don't want anyone to be thrown off by the neuro-oncology. It's more of an add-in. It's a completely different story, but my primary patient-based practice is with patients with colorectal cancer and other gastrointestinal cancers, like with Dr. Parikh. I think for this issue with clinical trials, I know that, and I'm grateful of this kind of forum because we can speak openly about myths or misunderstandings about clinical trials just as much as what they are. So just as much as what they are not is equally as important in my view. Clinical trials represent the next wave of promising therapies. So for anyone who is undergoing cancer treatment or is a caregiver or knows somebody undergoing cancer treatment, the standard of care treatments that you can get anywhere, whether it's here in Minnesota, anywhere across the US or internationally, are built on the foundation of clinical trials of years past. So clinical trials are either a composition of new drugs that are formulated for other cancers and for cancers like colorectal cancer, or drugs that are newly discovered, and the purpose of a clinical trial is to determine whether or not they might work and benefit patients, and anywhere in between. It's really the lifeblood and the pipeline that helps us push the envelope to better patient experience, quality of life, and overall survival. So when we ask about how the different specialties, and certainly in my background, I also have background experience during training with helping with lung cancer and seeing just how that treatment paradigm has revolutionized and been quite different than when I trained in decades past. And that's something we hope to recapture with colorectal cancer through the Case By initiative, sponsored by Colorectal Cancer Alliance and others. But I can say that it's no longer the case. We're just kind of remain our own narrow lane. We have a lot to learn from experiences in other cancers. We're going to hear some of that in the breast cancer world and others today. And I'm happy to kind of continue that thread throughout today's conversation.
Great, thank you. Dr. Parikh, you've led groundbreaking work in GI oncology and liquid biopsies. What innovations are on the horizon that could shift access for patients?
Um, Again, like Dr. Liu, thanks so much for having me. And do want to just have a little disclosure in terms of the fact that I did come off of NCCN and kind of pass it along to another colleagues. I'm no longer on that panel, but was a pleasure to do that. So in terms of, I think advances in the field, one of the areas that I think actually two areas that I'm really excited about. I think one is trying to understand the patients that are high risk for recurrence. And so, we have not moved the needle for adjuvant therapy in colorectal cancer for decades and decades. We have the same tools at our fingertips that we had 30 years ago, and those tools are not making enough progress. And though we do really well, we do have a lot of patients that still have their cancer come back. And so one of the areas that I'm really excited about is, capitalizing on the power of these tools that are called liquid biopsies and circulating tumor DNA to see if we can really shift the paradigm of drug development and cure more patients. This also applies to patients with metastatic disease and limited metastases. We don't have great tools for patients, for example, who are undergoing liver resections. And the majority of those patients do have their cancer come back. And in the late stage setting, I think still a tremendous opportunity. I think as Dr. Lewis mentioned, we're jealous of our lung cancer oncology colleagues in terms of the strides that they have made. And it is heartening to see the small impacts we're making for certain segments, actually large impacts for small segments. So the MSI high patient population, the fact that we can cure stage 4 patients with immunotherapy, BRAF, even a year ago, to have a patient that had to have a BRAF V600E was something we would all dread. And now, again, we're not curing yet enough, but we are seeing survivals for that small patient population that are reaching the survivals of, a RAS/RAF wild type patient with colorectal cancer. So we're starting to chip away at this pie slowly by slowly, and I'm optimistic that we will continue to chip away. But I think we have a tremendous amount of work to do. But I think these are the areas that I'm most excited about, is these subsets of patients that we're starting to get benefit remarkably from therapies. And then I'm thrilled to be working with Colorectal Cancer Alliance and CaseBuy to again move the paradigm around trying to cure more patients as well in the adjuvant setting.
Thank you. Before we move on, do either of you two have anything else to say on those two questions?
I have one other just thing in terms of one of the things that keeps me up at night in terms of young patients. I think, we all in this audience here recognize the tremendous burden that we're seeing with younger and younger patients, but clearly it took a lot of work to even get 45 recommended as the screening age. And as Dr. Liu knows, we see a lot of patients younger than 45 too. And so, what is the type of research and trials that we need to do to try to understand who in the younger patient population is at risk? I don't think it's a tenable solution to say we're going to start doing colonoscopies on every person at age 18. I'm sharing a pediatric patient right now with the peds folks. So can we start to do research I would love it if I didn't have a job, right? So can we detect and kind of prevent cancers and catch them early enough so patients don't have to come see Dr. Liu and myself. So I think that's the last tidbit that I'd like to just mention, that piece.
Absolutely. What Dr. Parikh is saying is all that keeps us up at night, everywhere from how do you screen, how do we improve screening to prevent finding half of our colorectal cancer new diagnoses at stage 4 and really in a difficult spot, and anywhere towards certainly in the span of my career, same thing where we used to say the average age of diagnosis 60 or so, and now we share that in common. So pediatric patients, teens, 20s, 30s, 40s seem to be the more predominant population of patients that I'm seeing. When it comes to trial access, that's also going to be a major point of discussion today. Like in the state of Minnesota, even though we're in a metropolitan area, Twin Cities, we have a large catchment area for our cancer center, and people will come from the Dakotas, from Wisconsin, from other reaches of Minnesota, a really wide geographic region. And so this question about how can we improve clinical trial access so that people don't have to come only to the cities, the Twin Cities, or any major metropolitan area to gain equitable access for clinical trials and innovative treatments should they so choose. And so all of this keeps us up at night from A to Z.
Thank you. I think those are very good call outs. And yes, as the clinical navigator for the Alliance, I do hear a lot of that, like a struggle for clinical trials is the barriers. Not everyone can get to the bigger institutions. So how can we find more smaller centers, or how can we get these patients to trials? Depending what the age they are, right? Because that 20-year-old group has completely different barriers versus that 6-year-old group. So I think that's a really good topic of discussion. So moving on, we are going to talk about the human side of clinical trials. So when we talk about clinical trials, it's always easy to focus on the science, the protocols, the data, the outcomes. But behind every data point is a person, someone who has made a deeply personal decision to participate in research that can not only change their life, but the lives of others. The human side of clinical trials is about understanding that participants aren't just subjects. They're mothers, fathers, friends, and patients navigating fear, hope, and uncertainty. It's about listening to their concerns, addressing barriers like transportation or financial strain, and ensuring they truly understand the study they're joining. Clinical trials can't succeed without trust, and trust is built through compassion, communication, and respect. When we bring the human element into clinical research, when we see the person, not just the protocol, we strengthen recruitment, improve retention, and ultimately enhance the quality of science itself. So why clinical trials advance medicine? It's the human connections, the empathy, the advocacy, the relationships that drive the progress. So I'm going to bring Sharon on. And Sharon, could you please share your brother's story and how that led to founding Trials of Color? And if you want to share anything about your breast cancer trial.
Thank you so much for having me. And it is basically an honor and a privilege to be here today. because 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, given little hope. And, after the standard care, I found the clinical trial. In the way of my brother, unfortunate, he did not have that same opportunity. He was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and he was diagnosed in late stage, and he passed away 37 days after he was diagnosed. And at that time, and even today, I swore that we would make a difference when it comes to colorectal cancer. So trials of color, we start looking at what percentage of Black and Brown population was actually participating in a clinical trial. And we were shocked of the data that we found that, as Dr. Paris said, for decades, the last 18 years, 19 years, we only had 5% that actually participate in a clinical trial. So what we went out and did is start talking about clinical trials, start being the human face to let people know that, it's a lot of things about clinical trials that people don't know. It's a lot of myth that's out here as well. You're going to be a guinea pig. That's not true. I mean, one thing about a clinical trial is you get best of service. You are still under physician care. And when we talk about cancer, we are all happy that we finished treatment. But then you go home and pray and wait and hope that you stay in remission. In a clinical trial, they are monitoring that. They are monitoring different things. So you doing blood work, and it depends on what type of clinical trial, because there's so many types. It could be medication, it could be a financial trial, it could be caregivers. It's so many types of clinical trial, but the ones that I was in was all medication trial. So although I was scared to death chemo and radiation, I opt into a more chemotherapy. Now, one of the barriers is the lack of knowledge, the lack of awareness, and that's where trials of color come in, by being boots on the ground, answering the tough questions. We hear about Henrietta Lacks and Tuskegee. That did happen. So that's not a miss. That definitely happened. So we want to make sure when that happened, they did not have patient advocates sitting on NCI boards and having a voice. And I'm clearly for the patient. So we are out there listening. They did not have rules and regulation at that time. We have that now. It's not that easy to get a clinical trial approved. So that's a little bit. And actually, I'm speaking, I'm going back and forth between me and my brother. But today I'm very proud to say I'm actually in my 5th clinical trial. So I definitely can be a voice and said, hey, how about this? How about this? But answer the question and walk the walk, and meet when we talk about meeting people where they are, go out in the field. Not everybody have access to digital and things like that. So I don't want to take up this whole hour, so I'll let someone else go, but that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That was really great insight into the caregiver side, but also the patient side of clinical trials. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Janice, it is your turn. I have a question for you. So Janice, what has your journey been like as a patient navigating stage 4 colon cancer and exploring clinical trials options? You're on mute, Janice.
My apologies. Again, thank you for having me here today. As a stage 4 patient, I actually have never been offered a clinical trial. I asked about clinical trials, I would say somewhere around year 3. I'm coming up on year 9, actually, here in November. And I was told at the time that I had to exhaust the standard uh, care before I could even be considered for a clinical trial. And depending on which drugs I had already taken, it could actually prevent me from being a candidate for a trial. So that kind of led me to the advocacy side of things because some of it didn't really make good sense to me. And I'm from Alabama and I'm stubborn. So I just wanted to do my own research. And as time has gone by, I realized that some of that, I won't say it wasn't correct, but it has changed. It has since changed. And you can definitely participate in a trial before you have exhausted all of the standard care. Um, for me, as I stated, not having had the option to have a trial, participate in a trial, I have had more surgeries. I had 6.5 years of chemotherapy, 5 rounds of radiation. And then after all of that, we started with the surgery. What I found, like Ms. Sanchez, is that's the information piece. And it led me to develop or my own just pilot of Cancer Out Academy. And what we do is collect as much information as we can, teach courses here as often as we can by Zoom so that we can reach a larger population of people and sit on boards and do the research that's necessary to break down the barriers that would keep people from participating. Because as it was alluded to earlier, the Tuskegee thing, it just kind of hangs over our head here in the South, particularly in Alabama. And no one really wants to risk being in a clinical trial. But I have come across in my day-to-day activities at least one person that he went straight into a trial and is doing extremely well. And so for that reason, we tried to find out as much as we can about it, even though I wasn't personally involved, to make sure that those that I come across on a daily basis are, and that they can, they can be comfortable making the decisions.
Dr. Purdy, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I think the other way I like to frame it to a lot of my patients is around, I think the bar to even open clinical trials is different than the bar was even 10 years ago. So I think we are a lot more thoughtful around what we open and what we're offering. And of course, you can't guarantee that something is going to work for someone. That's the whole point of trials. But I think even the data that leads to the trial has to be quite sound before many institutions are taking it on. And so I think it's also a little bit of a shift in terms of how clinical trials to be, how clinical trials come to be. And I don't know if Dr. Liu agrees with me on that, but I think we're spending a lot of time thinking about, like, is this the right trial to have? And then um, for my own patients, I find it my job to kind of have a sense of what is out there, nationally. And I think it is a huge equity issue that, patients can't access it everywhere. But we're not just kind of, I think, throwing darts and seeing what, hits a little bit. We're trying to be thoughtful around why might this particular trial versus another also benefit a patient rather than just kind of trying to fill the trials, which I think is a little bit of a myth. And I'm not sure that everyone takes that approach, but I think I feel very confident in saying many of my colleagues that treat patients with colorectal cancer and are putting patients on trials are taking this approach of, raise the bar of what gets into clinic and then be thoughtful around which trials you're actually offering for patients.
Karen, did you have something?
I did. I think one thing here is that what you have to qualify for a clinical trial. So it's not like sign up a patient or sign me up. So just to be able to qualify, and I was never promised anything. In fact, one of the trials, because as things change, they have to, do amendment and it's certain guidelines. And I said to my physician, I don't think you want me here. And she just said, no, I just want to make sure that you understand this. And I had to, repeat it back verbatim. The nurse would come in, or the nurse navigator would explain. You will hear her coming down the hall, and she said, oh, tell me what you learned today. And she said, well, it's no guarantee. So it's not a guarantee, but no one who have gone through cancer want anyone to go through cancer. So we can even look at it like for our future, for children, for our loved ones, that we still can make a difference. Again, if we speaking of new medication, do that work for us. If we look at the cold caps, we all have different hair texture. Do that work for us. If we don't have enough participating in clinical trials, we would never know. So
I tend to agree with everything that has been said. I also think that just the knowledge of available trials has been missing. Uh, understanding that you have to qualify, but just the fact that where do I go to look? You know, clinicaltrials.gov is not really something that you can navigate if you don't have the education and training to do that. But what I feel like is missing is just the availability of the information. I realize that this may not be for me, but once you become a patient, you meet so many other patients, and patients share information. So even if it may not have worked for me, had I known, I could have shared it with someone else, maybe say in my support group, or, while I'm getting an infusion or whatever. And I just found that in my situation personally, not only was it not available, we didn't know where to go look. And it wasn't just voluntarily told to us.
Dr. Liu?
Yes, no, I will absolutely second that. Clinicaltrials.gov is a repository for everything that's filed, but I will say that I too, even being in this field, I have great difficulty navigating it. Sometimes I might even know a trial, but I just can't find it, even best effort. So how much more so that anyone looking it up, looking for themselves or for someone they care about. When I think of trials, I think of a lot of mantras in general in life, but I think of the right trial for a trial that is available, that it is accessible first. I think the right trial for the right patient at the right time. And so examples of that for colorectal cancer, we know of combination therapies that include the pump 5-FU chemotherapy, FOLFOX, FOLFIRI, maybe FOLFOXIRI, are tried and true that have gone through the rigor of clinical trials for multiple decades and tend to be one iteration of that or another used first and then second. And I agree with Ms. Johnson that although there are drugs that are FDA approved that have gone through trials, the quality of life improvement, how long someone lives, and progression-free survival are limited. They're measured in weeks to months. So to me, that is a prime opportunity for many patients to enroll in trials. I want to acknowledge a question that's in the chat about immunotherapy and when is a potential time to switch to an immunotherapy from a chemotherapy that may be working. Without knowing details of anyone's specific situation, another mantra that I mention to patients is for any drug, there is no guarantee, no 100% guarantee that a drug will work and doesn't have side effects. There's no such drug exists. So that's something that's very much an optimal goal. But I would say that's not just true of chemotherapy, but in this era where immunotherapy is on billboards, it's on Super Bowl ads, and that's very much de rigueur. Whether it's immunotherapy for patients, the 5 to 10% of patients have that marker called microsatellite instability that Dr. Parikh was referring to earlier, or BRAF, that moved from further line to second line to now first line, but even that's in a limited subpopulation. So I kind of think like many cancers, and we talked about lung cancer earlier, it's no longer just lung cancer or just colorectal cancer. It's a defining trait for the features under the microscope or the test to help define opportunities for clinical trial based on a subset, based on a drug that fits that target. So that also becomes part of the decision-making process, but certainly how do we expand access so it's not just people in major cities and not just someone that is with an oncologist who is either in the space running clinical trials or at least spends the time doing their homework. We have to raise awareness. I think social media has been immensely helpful for that. But I think advocacy organizations like Colorectal Cancer Alliance are driving engines of that really help to create that bridge between oncology offices with patients and caregivers. And how do you even navigate this immense avalanche of information is part of the challenge. At the same time, and trying to balance that with opportunity and making sure that, again, right patient, right trial at the right time, that we can achieve that.
Thank you. That was great. And yes, to Dr. Liu's point, if you are navigating clinical trials, if it is something, even when you're diagnosed that you're thinking of, whether you're a patient, you're a caregiver, please call the Alliance. I'm one of the clinical navigators, and we do clinical trial navigation. Let us do that work for you and help you through that instead of you spending hours on clinicaltrial.gov. Put that on us. We are so happy to do that for you. Sharon, did you have something?
I did. And
Yeah.
one of the myths that's out there is that you have to be late stage to get in a clinical trial. And that's not true. I wish it was right after standard of care, that it was almost like you must, because that's definitely a myth. You any stage as long as you qualify. So you do not have to be stage 3, stage 4, stage 2. You can be stage 1 as long as you qualify for that clinical trial. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. That is great. Well, we are going to look forward to the future now with these clinical trials. So as we look forward, we're reminded that clinical trials are more about science, more about than just science. They're about people. Every participant brings a story, a family, and a hope for a better future. Our goal is to make these trials more accessible and equitable for everyone. That's why we're excited about the future of CaseSpy, the Alliance's innovative clinical trial platform that will fast-track research and bring therapies to patients faster. By combining innovation like CaseSpy with compassion and human connection, we can bring more people the opportunity to participate in life-changing research and move closer to a future where hope and healing are within everyone's reach. So this is just going to kind of go out to whoever wants to answer. Feel like this one's a Dr. Liu one, but looking ahead, what excites you most about the next generation of clinical trials, whether it's adaptive design, decentralized models, liquid biopsies, or something else entirely? What are you excited for in the future?
Lindsay, my answer is yes to all of that, because we don't have to limit ourselves to just one of those. And for those joining and hearing that term CaseSpy for the first time, we're building and learning from a decade and a half plus experience from iSpy, which is an adaptive trial platform that has seen immense success in the breast cancer world and really define new endpoints, such as something called pathologic complete response. In other words, some treatment, whether chemotherapy or targeted given prior to lead up to surgery, and the information showing what percentage of patients and raising the bar on the number of patients that have had tremendous treatment response as measured by what pathologists look under the microscope is huge. And so the Colorectal Cancer Alliance is supporting CaseSpy, which is, I call it the iSpy of colorectal cancer, replicating that platform and an idea of adaptive trial platform, which is trying to take the albatross, the immense logistical challenges that are inherent in any clinical trial. And then I'll say we talked a little bit about the end. How do you offer clinical trials, give them more access? But at the very beginning, Dr. Parikh was saying very eloquently that it has to rest on sound scientific principle, but not every good idea, even if we have proof for it, is it logistically possible to bring into a clinical trial. They cost millions upon millions of dollars. You blow your mind to know how much it costs on average per patient. But we have to put great thought and place a mandate that we have and a premium on safety. So taking all that as part of the logistics of it, and then incorporating how can we improve upon clinical trials, adaptive trial platforms like CaseSpy and what iSpy already is, it's an attempt to really speed up the process, because instead of giving a therapy and trying to understand not until months later whether a treatment worked. How can we speed that up and maybe weeks or months to do that? And something that's an advantage compared to a decade and a half ago when iSpy launched, there are amazing emerging technologies, and they're improving every day, like liquid biopsy, whether there be the cells that tumors shed off into the bloodstream that can be tested by commercial companies or academic labs or others, or the DNA that's shed. That's an area of one research in my lab, and I think that's something that's really paradigm shifting. But at the same time, part of the challenge of new tests like that is how do we as oncologists and as a community interpret them correctly to be able to make decision making for whether or not a drug is a right fit for that individual patient or groups of patients with the information we know from their tumor, or should we change therapy? Some of the questions in the chat were along those lines. But CaseBuy is really looking to incorporate that. It is and will be an adaptive trial platform intended, as Dr. John Marshall, I'll quote from him often and always, quick no-go signals. We're not going to look for years and years of trials and patients to be enrolled before we make a decision and look at the analysis. Is this working at all or not? Quick failures and move on to something else that's promising as part of the intention. And part of the tools, using liquid biopsy, doing more frequent scans. And Ms. Rivera Sanchez was saying very nicely that the oversight of clinical trials, maybe I'm busting a myth, or maybe I'm saying what many people on this call who are watching us already know. There's actually part of that mandate of safety requires immense oversight. Now I would argue more frequent visits, more intensive oversight, lab tests and otherwise, than for standard of care. But we also acknowledge that that causes more financial toxicity, perhaps more financial cost. Even at things as mundane sounding as parking and gas to drive to a clinic, to be able to get that testing, or time toxicity. One of my colleagues here works on that. Just the amount of time, maybe it takes away from your work, takes away from your family, takes away from your hobbies and things that you love to do that you would otherwise do if not being treated for cancer, are all things of consideration. But CaseBuy, and with the formulation that we've been working hard over the last year, Dr. Parikh and I and many other oncologists, we are really poised and super excited to bond with Colorectal Cancer Alliance to bring this early in 2026 and to move forward with as many centers as we can, acknowledging some of the logistical challenges I was saying earlier. But it's a start, and we are very hopeful it'll be a great start for patients throughout the country.
All right, well, we're going to go to questions here. We have a ton of questions here from our audience. So we are going to start out, and whoever, looks like this first one is for Janice. So 10 years living with CRC, wow, that gives hope. Janice, would you be able to share what types of treatment have you been on and what genomic type, if you are comfortable sharing?
Absolutely. I believe that that's my purpose, is to help provide the information. I have a KRAS 12D as in David, TP3 gene. When I began, I was stage 3B when I first got diagnosed. Stage 3B, no family history, no pain, no symptoms. Just really came home with a bad stomach ache and went to the ER and was almost it was almost overlooked because I was 38. No, I'm sorry, I was 48. I was 48 at the time, and the screening age was 50. So it was difficult for me to get a colonoscopy, and I was sent home to, just told I was, constipated. But I did get the colonoscopy, and as a result of that, the first treatment that I was on, if I'm not mistaken, was Folfox. But I've been on Folfox, I've been on Folfuri, I've been on Irinotecan, I've been on oxaliplatin, and all of them, of course, were combined with another drug. So it's my understanding that colorectal cancer, it works best as a combo treatment than it does individually. I had biweekly treatments, about 4 or 5 hours in the infusion clinic, came home for an additional 48 hours with a chemotherapy pump that I wore. And then I went back to have that pump removed. So it was gruesome. However, I do feel very fortunate. I was never on a treatment that really I didn't see some results from. The problem was every time we would try to bring me off, if I would get to an NED status within weeks, we would have new growth. So then I would have to go back on. And I was in a community facility for a large percentage of the time. And then I switched to an NCI center where there was more research and a larger population of physicians. And that is where I was introduced and offered radiation therapy, which radiation really didn't work for me. I only had 5 rounds, but it really did not work. And my doctors pretty much determined that we had kind of exhausted all options because I would just have to go back through one of the prior treatments. And for a short time, I did go back to oxaliplatin. But for me, of course, it started in my colon, but then it went to my liver within a year. And I had an ablation on my liver, and then it left my liver and went to my lungs. And so lungs was the area that we fought the hardest with and continue to fight with. Last year, I had my lower right lobe completely removed, and I had some resection done on the left, and I now have a met in my pelvis. So it just kind of keeps coming and fighting. But I would say that living with the disease, I've managed to make it work. First couple of years, it was so scary. I had a 10-year-old child. And of course, all the fears that goes with that. But I'm not saying this because of, this platform that we're on today. But when I began to get out there and volunteer, not only did I feel better, I learned more. I knew questions that I could ask my oncologist, and it just opened up a new world for me. And even though I have, according to the reports, I have an active area, I haven't had any treatment in 2 years. So I have been very fortunate, very blessed to after I had the radiation, I didn't have anything else. I was so tired that I would just cry on the way to treatment because it was just so, it was just hard to go that long every 2 weeks. And my doctors agreed, and we've just been chugging along, and that's kind of my story as to how I've lived with it.
Thank you for sharing, Janice. That's an amazing story, and we hope that you can do what's right for you. And we're so happy you shared that with us. All right, Dr. Lou, you're on the hot spot again. Are there currently any immunotherapy trials for MSS patients without any targetable mutations? Any research being done on that?
Tons of research being done on that. So I would say I know we were alluding to lung cancer a lot, but that's been the paradigm of identifying small subsets, even if they're as little as 5 or 10%. That can make a big deal if there is a drug in the pipeline that goes through a clinical trial, and BRAF as a prime example. But the next stage of evolution is going beyond targets, because what happens when someone has a cancer that doesn't have that target? Why should they be left out of drug development? And part of that is what they might say, I might just call biomarker agnostic, meaning not dependent on a drug that only would potentially work. Now, of course, not guaranteed to work in a target that's testable and identified. So I would say some of the examples are exactly that. So, the person who asked that question, very astute, immunotherapy trials that's really only been limited to, less than 1 in 10 patients. But how do you convert that and flip it on its head and make that available to the other 90%? So there's a lot of effort to do that. The MSS, for those watching, not familiar with that jargon, microsatellite stable is a designation of basically the DNA in someone's tumors. That's something that's tested and has become standard of care to identify for any stage diagnosis of colorectal cancer, and that for immunotherapy that we commonly know the infusible kind, Some are called pembrolizumab or nivolumab to be used for patients who try chemotherapy no longer works, who might be eligible for that type of immunotherapy. But there are other classes of immunotherapy. Here, as an example, at the University of Minnesota, we did a genetic engineering form of cell therapy. It is a type of immunotherapy, and we reported that in the spring with some good results. But that was basically taking cells from someone's individual tumor, genetically engineering it to basically train it to go against the cancer, and then to supercharge it and infuse back into the patient. So that's a different strategy used for immunotherapy. But how to overcome this in a way that's cost effective, more widely available, remains a great challenge. There's plenty of research going on along that. And I would say, as was mentioned about KRAS G12D, for many, many decades, dating back to the early 80s or even the 70s when RAS was discovered, it's how it affects different cancers is variable. It drives 19% of all cancers, and it's seen about 40 to 50% of all cases of colorectal cancer. And for decades, until recent years, it was called the great undruggable target, meaning so much research for decades at the national, international level that if we could only target it, that would be a target that we know exists in colorectal cancer, 90% of pancreas cancers, and many others. And so what we've seen wave after wave of different drugs coming in the pipeline, clinical trials have gone through, much more progress to be made, but it actually has influence in different types of cancers, lung and colorectal and others. But there are many more clinical trials looking to prove if these new next-in-class drugs that they call can target that and become the next wave of hopefully successful drugs for patients with colorectal cancer. It won't be an immunotherapy, but looking at what combinations immunotherapy with these targeted drugs or others, independent of what biomarkers, it's a constant topic at major cancer research meetings every day in my lab, in my clinic, and everyone's clinic and everyone's labs worldwide.
Dennis, did you have a comment to that?
I do. I want to say, in addition to what Dr. Liu mentioned, is I had the privilege of attending a cancer research symposium back, I think maybe my third year. It changed my life. Some of the things were way over my head, but the things I could understand, it changed my life for a couple of reasons, because just the research alone gave me hope to know that, eventually something's going to pop up. But then I met so many people that were stage 4 and they were living a pretty normal life, with the exception of treatments and whatnot. It gave me the hope I needed. And then when I got involved with Colorectal Cancer Alliance, which is how I got connected in many ways, the response from the Alliance, one of the leaders at the Alliance reached out to me personally and shared her story. It changed my life. From that point, I kind of knew that this wasn't a life sentence for me. Although when I first got the diagnosis, that's exactly what I thought. So to the person, that asked the question, as much as you can associate with others who are living with it, hopefully we are an example that it may not be easy, but it's doable. And I just want to thank Dr. Liu and all of his colleagues for everything they do on a daily basis, to help get us to the next level. It's a doable thing. It's not easy, but it's doable.
Karen, would you like to add in?
Yes. One of the things that Janet said early, she mentioned about fear, and it actually took me 8 years to say how fearful I was. I think that is a normal reaction of the unknown, but what I would say to everybody on this call or listening, don't let fear and don't let myth discourage you from getting involved with colon cancer alliances and getting involved with a clinical trial. As long as you qualify, it is some of the best care that you absolutely can receive. If it's a myth or something you heard, feel free to reach out to Colon Cancer Alliance, and reach out to anyone on this call, and they'll be more than happy. I know I do know this. I'm speaking for everyone on this call. They will be more than happy to answer that question and walk you through it. But as Janice said, as I'm saying, from a patient point of view, I definitely, my brother's not here. I can speak for him because we had a little chance to talk. The fear is there, but just get the care and get involved and make a difference. So that's it for me. And thank you, Dr. Liu, and everyone else on this call.
All right, we're going to try to get to these last two questions, Dr. Liu. They're both for you. We have about 10 minutes. So the first one is, if I have a path towards a clinical trial, but I'm currently on an FDA chemo that is working, should I finish this course of chemo or take this opportunity and return to FDA chemo?
Okay, I'll come back to that core concept of timing, and also mention that clinical trials, when they're written, they're really large packets, and part of that is what's called eligibility and exclusion criteria. So it's a set of objective measures. So it's not your oncologist really likes you, and because they like you and develop a good rapport with you, you're in. But it's meant to be a very objective assessment, and I would just say speak broadly without knowing which exact trial you might be a candidate for or are considering. A lot of trials may specify, unless they're for patients who are newly diagnosed and have not yet had treatment, might specify the progression of disease, or similar terminology might be a term that might be used, meaning that someone's on a treatment and it no longer works, and that's part of the entry point to be considered or eligible for the clinical trial, among many other things that might be written. So if someone in general, a general principle would be, if someone's on a drug or a combination of drugs that's already working, and if it's standard of care, there would be, unless there's a compelling reason, maybe safety, maybe someone's having a lot of difficulty with the side effects of a treatment, unless there's a compelling reason, generally someone would not be taken off of a set of drugs that might be working and are generally well tolerated in the eyes of the patient getting it, to stop and then pivot to a clinical trial. Timing is everything. So I come back to right trial for the right patient at the right time. So when you need it, ideally for that to be there for you. And at the same time, it might be the right trial. It might be the right trial for an individual, but a spot may not be open. And that's part of the challenge that we have in this day and age. I wish we could say 100% of the time there's a spot at the exact time that you or anyone needs it, but there's generally a limited number of spots. And the way clinical trials work is there might be a pre-specified X number for the center. Maybe it's as few as 5 or 10, or maybe nationwide. And so there's a lot of logistics behind it about when a center can enroll. Part of it's due to safety, for monitoring to make sure that no harm is being done for patients already enrolled in the trial. But there might be a case where even at our center, or someone goes to a number of centers eager to be part of a clinical trial, and it may not be available, not because the trial is not there, not because the eligibility isn't met. It's just that week, that month, when someone really needs to move on to a new therapy due to progression of disease, that a spot isn't open. And that's really another layer of challenge when we really want to get patients on clinical trials and the patient is eager and wants to be part of it. If there's a spot not available for another month or so, well, a patient can't wait a month or 2 months for that spot to be open. So we have to pivot and look to other available opportunities. So timing is also yet another wrinkle, and I could probably list 99 more. It is that complicated. It is a challenge. I would say, maybe because of the question in the chat, I'll bundle that about trials and supplements without. I'm aware that ivermectin is. I think I got 3 questions about ivermectin specifically just last week in clinic. I would say a usual way I would approach it would be, whether with clinical trials, maybe especially clinical trials, that might mandate no over-the-counter herbal non-prescribed supplements whatsoever. I'm not aware of ivermectin specifically, or some supplements like that being studied for colorectal cancer, but there very well may be. But broadly, I think for I think of supplements for which we don't know. Just because they're natural doesn't mean they have side effects. Would they interfere with our normal body function and prevent a chemotherapy or prevent a targeted or immunotherapy from working? Always kind of is a big unknown. So I always tell patients, if you were to opt to do this, then and you had a scan in which a doctor tells you this didn't work, would you be prepared to kind of accept that if you chose to do the supplement, not knowing whether or not it interfered with the treatment and it might otherwise have worked? So that's just one thing to consider. We don't know whether the natural effect on cancer cells might be to not suppress it, but to actually egg it on and create basically a stimulating effect for cancer cells, which we don't want, is an unknown factor. And also, I think with any non-FDA approved herbal alternative, other medication that's indicated for something else, you just don't know the composition of it and is it a pure product. So for me, globally, whether it's that drug or others, is a kind of a way I would approach it in discussing with patients in clinics.
Dr. Liu, there are several people that are asking whether or not you can provide an email address so that they can ask questions. Are you open to that? And if not, we can always ask them to ask their questions and we can send them over to you.
Oh,
So
please
whatever.
send over the questions. And yeah, absolutely. Colorectal Cancer Alliance at I work. What I worry is that between, and I'm always active on social media and always monitoring. I think for anything that's specific, maybe if you could go through Colorectal Cancer Alliance, I'd appreciate it. Otherwise, it might get lost in the deluge of routine messages I get. I never want to ignore them and
I will
make sure they get addressed.
absolutely. Stephen, can you put my email into the Q&A so that if people have questions, I can filter them and send them over to Dr. Liu for answers?
No problem, we'll do.
Thank you. So everyone, as much as I hate to end this webinar because it is so informative, both for me and I feel like for everyone else, I literally have learned so much in this impactful hour. It is time for us to bring it to a close. So I want to thank again Lindsay for moderating and making sure that everything went smoothly, and to each one of our panelists for joining us. You all had your own individual contribution that literally made this such a great panel for everyone. I would also like to thank our sponsors, our core sponsor, which is Olympus, and the co-sponsors again, who are Bristol Myers Squibb and Merck, who made this all possible for us. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me personally at K McNeil, and McNeil is McNeil at ccalliance.org, and I will get those questions and send them to whoever on the panel you'd like for them to go to. And also, like I said, you can or like Dr. Liu said, you can reach out to any one of these individuals who are all on social media if you'd like to ask them a question directly. Thank you all again for joining us. This has been a wonderful webinar, and I hope that it was as impactful for you as it was for me. Please do enjoy the rest of your day, and always constantly be looking out for ways that we can make life a little bit more equitable for everyone. Take care.